Hello everyone, welcome to History and Culture. In ancient China, passing on the family line and continuing the ancestral fire were considered extremely important. Especially for men. This was not only about the continuation of the family, but also about social and familial identity. The ancient saying goes, there are 3 unfilial acts. And having no descendants is the greatest, meaning that the most severe form of filial impiety was to have no children. As a result, many families would go to great lengths to ensure the continuation of their lineage. However, in poor families during ancient times, due to difficult living conditions, many men were unable to marry and have children. The societal conditions were very harsh. And many impoverished people could not even enjoy the basic opportunities of marriage and childbirth. For these poor families, how to carry on the family line became an urgent issue. Faced with this dilemma, some people resorted to unconventional methods to solve the problem. One such controversial practice was Jianhuanqi, also known as loaning a wife or borrowed wife marriage. According to historical scholars, this was a very unique form of marriage in ancient China. In simple terms, it involved lending one's wife to another person in order to fulfill the responsibility of passing on the family line. This practice involved the sale of the wife's rights, and after the wife was loaned out, she established a de facto marriage with the receiving party, even though, legally, she remained the wife of her original husband. During the loaning period, the children born by the wife would still call the original husband their father. But after completing her loan task, she would usually return to her original husband's home. Once she returned, her social status and family reputation were often affected. She would frequently face contempt and ridicule from family members and others. And her status would noticeably decline. According to historical records, the practice of Jianhuanqi was not present from the beginning of Chinese history. Its origins can be traced back to early human monogamous marriage systems, when the need for passing on the family line gradually emerged. As history progressed, this system gradually expanded and developed, especially during the Qin and Han dynasties, when the practice of loaning wives became more widespread. By the Song and Yuan dynasties, it had formed a relatively mature system. The practice of Jianhuanqi continued until the end of the Qing dynasty and into the Republic of China period, especially in rural areas where it still existed to some extent. It was closely related to the economic conditions, class differences, and the strong emphasis on bloodline continuation in society at that time. The essence of the Jianhuanqi system was to commodify women, treating them as tools for continuing the family line. This practice was often born out of the helplessness of poor families. When one family was financially unable to bear the responsibility of living and maintaining a household, they would loan their wife to another family in exchange for money. For the receiving family, which was also poor and unable to marry a wife in the traditional way, they could only use this wife-lending method to take advantage of the wife's reproductive ability to fulfill their own need for heirs. In addition, in practical terms, the fees for loaning a wife were usually negotiated between the lending and receiving parties. If the wife from the lending family was young, beautiful, and had strong childbearing ability, the loaning period would be longer, and the receiving family would have to pay more. On the other hand, if the wife was older or less attractive, the fees would be relatively lower. This system was not universally accepted in ancient society, especially after the rise of Confucianism, as it clearly contradicted the Confucian values of the 3 bonds and 5 constants, as well as ethical norms such as, a woman should not serve 2 husbands. With the increasing influence of Confucian culture, the practice of Jianhuanqi, a form of marriage contract, gradually came to be seen as a bad custom, often criticized and resisted by society. As a result, despite the widespread popularity of Jianhuanqi among the common people, many dynasties enacted laws to prohibit this practice. For example, during the Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties, there were laws specifically banning the existence of dianhuanqi. However, the enforcement of these laws was not strict, and this custom continued to be prevalent among the people. Moreover, some historians have discussed how poor people in ancient times solved the problem of marriage if they couldn't afford to marry. Due to poverty, many poor individuals who could not even afford the cost of a dianhuanqi were still able to find alternative ways to solve their marriage problems. The first method was government-mandated marriage. In ancient times, the government sometimes took measures to force marriages, especially during certain historical periods. For instance, during the spring and autumn period, King Goujian of Yu decreed that women must marry once they reached the age of 15. If a suitable husband could not be found, the woman's family would have to pay additional taxes to the state. Through this measure, the state forcibly promoted marriage, particularly for poor families. And the government's intervention helped alleviate their difficulties in finding wives. Although this system seemed harsh, it helped many poor people resolve their marriage problems and ensured basic social stability. The second method was encouraging remarriage. In ancient Chinese society, remarriage for women was not seen as a loss of dignity. Especially for widows who had lost their husbands, remarriage opportunities were often greater than those for first marriages. For poor men, they often could not afford to marry a first wife. So they would choose to marry a widow, as widows generally required lower dowries or bride prices. This phenomenon of remarriage was particularly common among the poor in ancient times. Remarried widows usually had children and were older, so the required dowries were lower, making it more affordable for poor men. This solution helped widows with their living problems and also allowed poor men to fulfill their duty of continuing the family line. The third method was to restrict the number of wives and concubines among wealthy families. In ancient times, wealthy men often had multiple wives and concubines, which exacerbated social inequality and made it more difficult for poor men to find wives. The large number of wives and concubines in wealthy families reduced the number of women available for poor men to marry, leading to a more competitive marriage market. To address this unfair situation, some local governments introduced measures to limit the number of wives and concubines a wealthy man could have. For example, the government would set a limit based on the social status and official rank of the wealthy individual, with only higher-ranking officials allowed to have more wives and concubines. Such policies helped balance the distribution of marriage resources between the rich and the poor, providing the poor with better opportunities to marry. The fourth method was to solve the issue through the practice of jueshi, marriage by marriage into the wife's family. A jueshi refers to a situation where the man marries into the woman's family, becoming a son-in-law. This typically happened when the woman's family was wealthier and the man's family was poor. By becoming a jueshi, the man could gain support from his wife's family and even inherit her family's property. Although this was a workaround, it allowed some poor men to enter into marriage and fulfill their duty of continuing the family line. The fifth method was to arrange marriages through marriage contracts. In some cases, men from poor families could solve their marriage problems through family-arranged marriages. Many marriages in ancient China were not decided by the individuals themselves, but arranged by their parents or families. For poor men, family alliances often took place through the exchange of property, land, or labor, allowing them to marry through these family arrangements, even if it meant sacrificing some personal choice. This is the History and Culture channel. Liking and subscribing are the greatest help and support to us. Thank you everyone and see you in the next time.